This morning's talk is about language, communication, so on, and the title is, will take some explanation probably, something I've talked a little bit about before, but I want to bring up again. Phrase, P-H-R-A-S-E, is that correct? Okay. Phrase fillers, filling in a phrase, and phrase fluffers. Just a way of talking about it. I don't know if that's what, if anyone would agree with that, but I'm not concerned with that. So, and since I'm very absent-minded, and there's several things I want to make sure that I mention because it is a strong idea here that I'm trying to present. I have some cliff notes for myself just before I jumped off the cliff. Phrase filler. So a phrase filler is like is something that we fill in, like the common one we all hear. Someone will make a statement, say, you know what I'm saying? Something like that. It's a totally unnecessary situation that is introduced in a conversation to help with the connection. What it does, though, is it stops or smothers or clouds over the intention or the meaning or the understanding. Anytime we use those, I'll read a bunch of them and you can, let me be honest. There's one. This is a fluffer. We were talking to somebody, it's like, you know, we might as well just say, you know, I'm going to stop lying to you. I've been lying to you all along, but now let me be honest. So it's a way of manipulating, very subtle and very friendly, manipulating someone's awareness to shut down. What they're basically saying is, you don't have to even check my credentials because I'm going to be, you know, I'm going to be honest with you. I just heard the former vice president started out with defending his prejudice by saying, here's the deal. Anytime anybody says, here's the deal, listen very closely to what is behind their words, because they're trying to manipulate you in some way. It might be completely benign from this point of view. It might be completely terrifying from this point of view. So I'll just read a few. Let me be honest, to tell you the truth, make no mistake. This is if you just hear that, just look at the personality that's behind that. And I'll say this in a way that you've heard me say before, if you've listened to this person much. I'm not trying to get you to correct anything. Don't stop doing this. I haven't stopped using those. But be very aware that you're using them. My teacher, the Vidyadhara Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, had some that he used. And one of them that always irritated me, this was way back in the early 70s, is that he would make a statement and then he would say, that seems to be the basic point. And he did it over and over and over and over again. Those of you who have actually heard him actually talk, Robert, have you heard him say that? That seems to be the basic point.
I think so,
Yeah.
but I don't remember.
You don't?
No.
Yeah.
It was a filler, so it went right by me.
Pardon me?
It was a filler, so it went right by me.
Filler.
I guess.
I'm not prejudiced, but that's a good. Well, you know, I'm not prejudiced, but anytime anybody says they're not prejudiced, they're prejudiced. There's just no doubt about it. There's some kind of prejudging or assumption about things. You know, like not to pick on our former VP, but there's not a prejudiced bone in my body. Oh my gosh, what a confession of ignorance. So here's the deal. We're all ignorant. You can't be here without being ignorant. This is the very nature of human existence, is ignorance. If you don't understand, I respond to questions. I can't always answer them, but I will respond. Make no mistake, let me stop lying. That's enough. That would be maybe more direct. You know, let me stop lying to you. I am going to start taking out the garbage as I said that I would every Thursday. So awareness about language and its structural intent to spread ideas that fuel, support, and resonate with others' one's motives and goals is basically propaganda. It may be benign, but it's propaganda. manipulating contrasts in awareness of self and others to get preferences. It's what it is. We're trying to, we call it communication, but we're trying to manipulate. I do that too. That's how I know about it. A phrasing that triggers a mutual ignorance. It triggers, you're having a conversation that there's a pretty strong understanding happening, but then we tend to close that off with some kind of a phrase filler. A good example of this is that you'll quite often hear is someone will be in the middle of saying, I'm just going to make up something. Red sports cars are better than blue sports cars just because the amount of light reflected from them, and right. So a person will pause and say right, or possibly you're saying something and they might interrupt you to say right. This is ignorance. I mean, it is a sign that the person is, by saying this, has actually stopped being open to what you're saying. Anytime anybody understands what you're saying or thinks they understand what you're saying, they might use that phrase filler. Right? Yeah, oh, right. Yeah, right. Sometimes you get 3 of them. Right. I've heard a few of those. If you ever have an interview with me, come in and do that. See what happens. So again, it's not so much about correcting, maybe a little bit. If a person seems to be not open to receiving any feedback, but just wants to present, in my situation as a teacher, just wants to present themselves, and I'll just let them do it. I'll just listen to them. I won't say much. But if there seems to be some kind of openness to having some feedback, I guess you'd say, about what's happening with them, then I might say, stop saying right. A few of my students have actually gotten that message. There are other ones. Anyone have a suggestion or have an idea about something? Yeah, Joseph?
The reality is.
The reality? Yeah, that's a pretty good one. Yeah, that's like saying, oh, by the way, I'm going to tell you about reality. I sometimes say, if you hear me say, in fact, I quite often will say in fiction after it. In fact and in fiction, because I don't know if this is, there's some factual aspect to it, but there's probably a lot of fiction too. So I might, as a way of kind of being able to say something, but also saying, I don't know if this has some kind of factual basis to it, probably some. The whole idea of fact and fiction is just another polarity. The world is full of polarities. It's called the 8 worldly dharmas. Our whole life can be run by wanting this and not wanting that. The basic teaching of the Buddha is about that situation, about grasping at this and rejecting that. It's the second noble truth of the Buddha. The first one is suffering, dissatisfaction. We don't like it. However, whatever is happening, we don't like it. It might even be the slightest little thing like, it's okay, but. This is okay, but. We need to move this and move that. Yes?
I have a couple questions. The first one is, how does addressing the way in which we muddy up language helpful? What about that is more helpful than the way we currently speak?
So what I'm recommending or suggesting is just it's always about awareness as far as the way I approach this. It's about being aware that this is happening, not stopping it or trying to get some kind of get yourself to another state of mind where you're less muddy or more enlightened. This is just a misunderstanding, but it's quite a profound one that someone can actually, using relative constructs, get them into some kind of state that is completely clear. It's spiritual materialism. The mundane path, you can do that. You can move along because it deals in polarities. Results, no results. Success, failure. Really good situation, really bad. Really painful, really pleasurable. More?
Is there something that's happening when we use phrase fillers that we need to be aware of?
Well, yes. The idea there is to be aware that whatever you're saying or whatever the other person is saying, that even though we might impute some kind of clarity to that, there's a whole lot of shade. There's a whole lot of things, and being aware of the lack of clarity is its own kind of clarity. This is what the Buddha, not that I was checked in with the Buddha, but from my understanding of the teachings is that the Buddha was very, very clear about ignorance. He was very clear of the way things are shut down, and he was so completely clear about it that it actually was enlightenment. It was a realization, because nothing is separate. The fundamental understanding is nothing is separate from anything else. So when one's consciousness, which is, you can't locate it, it just seems to be kind of hang around your form, but it's not limited to this place. The whole idea of consciousness with place, we're not talking about nerve endings. We're not talking about perception. We're talking about consciousness and the awareness that can actually be directed this way or that way. So very, very nothing's coming up as a word, but a very vague, from the point of view of ego or self-centeredness, of that which wants success, that which wants and does not want failure. That particular merchandising mentality wants to control the situation and squeeze things in such a way that we get pleasure, success, and so on out of it. And so what I'm recommending in response to your question, or hopefully in response to your question, is bringing the awareness into that without doing anything with it. If you start fiddling with it, as soon as you start manipulating anything, this is what's happening to the awareness. The awareness needs to be on receive. So what we do, we sit down, take up a symmetrical posture, hold very still, and all the senses are open, and we just receive the thoughts, the emotions, the memories, the judgments, the evaluations, the sound of the birds, the sound of the fan. Just receive, just receive. And you'll notice that if you're just receiving, if you do it enough, you'll notice that there comes a time, or 3 times, or 8 times, or many times, when you can actually receive something and do nothing with it. How does that feel? You don't know what it is. We had an example here this morning. I was looking at what happened. Other people were around the corner, and they were looking at what they think happened. I saw what happened. Junshu saw what happened. And what happened? A giant elf came through the door and stomped on the floor and threw all of his garbage, and she went and cleaned it up. What did you guys think happened that were around the corner? Anybody with a vivid imagination? Of course, what happened was obviously, or maybe not so obvious, is the flower arrangement, which I probably, who had to blame for that? No praise, no blame. Fell over and made a racket. It was probably something about the balance of it. I don't know if you have any idea why it fell over. No. But anyway, it fell over and made a clash. Well, if you saw that, then you just saw it. You just saw what happened. But if you didn't see that, then you may have had, did anyone have a really creative solution to that? Did people hear that? No. So Andrew, what did you think it was?
At first I thought it was one of the bells fell over and knocked over some water.
Yeah.
But I remembered that it came on to being a little precarious the other day. So
Oh, okay. You were precarious and you didn't fix it?
I did my best, but apparently
They did my best. I like that. Yeah, well, I'm doing my best too, so, yeah. Okay, so it's a way of looking at anytime anything occurs, something falls over, we immediately rush at it with our ideas about it. Or not, you might, when that happened, I immediately looked at the Shuso to see because he could not see what happened. And it's not particularly a credential, but he didn't do much. I couldn't see any. Did you have any idea what it was?
I guess just proximity, there was an idea that it was the flower. It was interesting, that sound, you could hear the tone of the metal change as the water left it. It was like, wow. I thought that was kind of neat.
So what is that? That's received. I'm not giving him some kind of accolades for that, but nothing much happened except just what was there. But you won't get a credential for that, my friends. If you practice, you will not have a success story. It's not about that. That's spiritual materialism. What will happen is, if you want something, let me say it this way. What will happen is you'll be more and more clear about what you don't understand. You'll be more and more clear about, just like in Chazon's case, his understanding of it went in. He received it. He couldn't receive that sound of the tone of it changing as the water left. But that's a very precise direction of the awareness is going into that, and is a very low-level analysis. It's not an intentional analysis based on ego wanting to figure something out or have a success story or manipulate or control something. It's an analysis that arises spontaneously out of what? Dependent origination.
You said that to kind of contrast, like if someone saw that, you saw what happened, and if not, you had an idea or you thought what happened. And then just think about how Chazon, it seemed like just a really passive way of it probably being the Ikebana that fell over.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference between that and thinking we knew what happened?
What do you think? So he received what was there. It seems. I can't get inside of his squirrel cage, but he saw what happened and did some low-level analysis and understanding of it. Just kind of, you could say, kind of appreciating the way the sound changed. So, but it doesn't sound like much addition was happening there, and there was no. And my perception, I'm sitting here watching this, and it was interesting for me to watch and see who was going to do something. Because I wasn't going to say, get up and fix that. So someone just Junchu kind of appointed herself. How did that feel to you? How did that look to you? How did that show? Because something occurred. This is like the 5 dharmas in the Lankavatara Sutra. Something happens, we name it, and then we make up stuff about it. And then the other 2 might be down the road. But the first 2 happen all the time. Something occurs, we get it, something fell over, so we named it. The Ikebana fell over. And then we could either go in to say, start to blame Michael. Did you do that, Flower Ringman? Don't you feel ashamed of yourself? So actually, do you feel to blame for that?
No, my first thought was, why did Sokuzan have to be in here when that happened?
Yeah, he's never in here. But he's in here. Yeah. It's a good Oh my. So did anything happen with that? I mean, did you add anything to it, or can you share that?
I didn't see it happen, I just heard it, and then turned and saw flowers on the floor and water pouring out, and I got up, and then after I got up, the judgment started. Oh, should I have gotten up? Well, it's already too late. You should just continue.
And so this is a really good, so should I have gotten up? Should I be the one? Should somebody else be doing that? Should we just leave it there for people to trip over when they come in the door? All those things start to come up, and it's not about stopping those. It's not about being somebody else. Please don't try to be somebody else. Be who you are. Be who you are. So be genuine. Be who you are. Live your karma. This doesn't mean accept it. I didn't say that. This is what it looks like to accept something. Don't do anything with it, but live the situation as it arises. It will be, I'm not saying you can't do that without an awareness practice or meditation, but it'll be a lot harder, because as the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune come your way, you're going to take them personally, and you're going to fight back, or you'll object to some things and agree with other things, and you'll be tied up in that Coney Island of the mind. Yes.
So would that be an example of don't do anything unless you have to, and then the judgments? So she sprung into action, and I don't know what the thought process was.
And then she started adding.
Yeah.
She saw it, And the first thought, best thought kind of thing that Rinpoche talks about. You know, you see it and you just go fix it. But the follow up, the little what do they call those things? Pilot fish. You know, they stick. You're the whale. Well, you're the whale, and then the pilot fish stick on you, and they kind of trail along as your karma following you. Whereas you could just do it. It could be just a straightforward situation with nothing extra. It might be more about how the carpeting feels on your feet as you walk over there. It might be more about more receiving, and less producing things. Less taking something that happens and producing something. When you produce something, you increase the illusion of separation. Anytime you evaluate or judge anything, anybody, yourself or anyone else. And this doesn't mean that I'm saying you should stop doing that. Just be aware of it. If you're just aware of it, then awareness, there is no solid being who can succeed. There's no solid being who can fail. To be aware of that is powerful. Yes?
Thinking of that situation, it seems like a lot of us have like one aspect that we don't like: judgment, pride, or how we shut down things. And you often tell us that we don't have to fix that, and sometimes that those things haven't gone away for you. Does the awareness practice just take the edge off of that because we just see that it happens all the time?
Might take the edge off. Might make a sharper edge. It's about don't correct it. Just don't. I'm not saying you shouldn't correct something that's creating powerful issues for you that are difficult or for someone else. Maybe a little bit of that, but we tend to go overboard on it and try to really, wrestle something down so it doesn't happen anymore, and then keep checking to make sure that's gone away. Nothing needs to go away. Your craziest thoughts. Want to help others? Would you like to help others? Start with yourself. Be kind to yourself. The karma that arises in your mind, I don't care how terrible the thoughts are, I don't care how terrible the actions are. Some actions in the world are horrible. But if you go to praise and blame, you'll actually ignore those rather than actually see what they are. Just be responsible for your own life and for your own thoughts. This doesn't mean there's someone thinking them. It's just a thought. So, difficult.
How important is the way in which we communicate or select words to communicate?
So the important thing that's probably not emphasized enough in communication is to receive. Quite often we think that communicating something is telling somebody something, explaining something, making sure they're clear on it, and that they understand what we think and how we feel, and rather than just receive. If you just receive, then you'll do a lot less talking, and you'll just be with whatever's happening. You're just there, whether you're just receiving that and not particularly adding anything onto it. Sometimes our perception of something is so powerful that we can actually see even though the person is smiling and acting happy, we can see their suffering deeply. Don't meddle with that. So I think it's good. I think the awareness around that and around the idea of just receive, as I've said, here's another phrase filler, as I've said hundreds of times. Bleh. Recognize that? Just receive. Give everything your attention. The most profound form and simple form of generosity. Just pay attention. Pay attention. Pay that way. Give everything your attention. And if you do that, then if things come your way in terms of things arising, then you'll be able to receive them as they are without adding your idea, your interpretation, your judgments, your post-it notes onto everything. Receive it just like it is. It might be difficult to do that. We quite often want to find out why is that? Why does that look so terrible? Why questions are circular. Notice when you ask, when something happens, how easy it is for the self-centered mind, the ego mind, the narcissistic mind to go to why. As soon as you go to why about anything, it's not that there isn't some value there. but we tend to use that as an escape hatch to stop looking at the very thing that we're interested in finding out why it happened. Because when something happens and you say, why does that happen? You've actually abandoned the very thing that's happening. But if you say, what is that? Then you go into that very so-called arising itself. Shoto.
Seems like with language, we're at best 2 degrees removed from what we're saying, because I have to speak through what I think this word means, and
Yes.
I'm imputing that whoever I'm talking to is doing the same thing. So, is there a way to bridge that gap, or to?
You don't have to bridge a gap. Just be aware that that's happening. The awareness of that is enough. But if you try to adjust it, like with an intention about a result, then that's when the circularity starts, and we start participating. We actually abandon the spiritual path and go into the mundane path of success and failure. And it's not that some people, some teachers actually teach in that way and use relative truth to, we use it some here. We say, here's a monastery. You want to train your mind? Here are the forms. Come in and practice. What we don't do is we don't. It's not a cult. It's not something you have to do. This is totally up to you. It's your energy that keeps you here. If you want to get up and leave, I may scold you for leaving, or I may be disappointed that you leave. But I respect, and as I tell everyone else, respect people's confusion. Don't try to fix people, and if you can handle it, stop blaming people for things that they. You might better have some sympathy for people who are so wound up and so crazy and so unclear about the mess they make of themselves and their life. Might have some sympathy. Fancy word is compassion. But if the compassion isn't happening here, it's not going to happen out there, because how you treat the world is modeled on how you've been treating yourself. If you're shutting down yourself, you're going to shut down the world, more than likely. Or maybe less than likely. It's a war. Paper, scissors, rock?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, in that case. Go ahead. Choo-choo.
You mentioned how phrase fillers can be a form of manipulation. If we are using phrase fillers that we aren't aware of, is there some sort of manipulation that's coming from this side?
It could be. It could be. That's the idea, of to be aware. Just be aware of that. I probably have half a dozen of them. You could probably tell me what they are. I say a lot. Duh. Some of that is to give us a chance to maybe think a little bit more, or reflect on what it is we're trying to say. But space works just as well. It's just that the ego mind is not so comfortable with space. So my teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, would, one of the, an interesting talk that he gave, I don't know when it was, but a long time ago, he came in and it was a 2-word talk. And he sat up there and he just sat there for a long time, and everybody's kind of waiting for him to talk. He didn't talk for a long time. And then he said, be genuine, and left. That's it. That was the talk. Maybe that didn't happen. Maybe I just made that up. Do you guys make stuff up? No? Okay. I finally got a response. So they have some time, so further questions. Robert?
Sure. Right. A lot of the fluffers that you talked about, they seem, what I heard, and this is whatever, that was another. And another. What was just a sense of contempt or disdain. Like I've heard it before. I know what you're about. And usually it's in response to something where I feel like if I said that I really feel like I've heard it before. That you know, oh, you're just running your thing. I've been put in a box, and I guess my question is, what does this have to do with conversation? I mean, because not saying anything could be as fixated and bound up as striking out. What does it mean to do nothing?
If one is working with their mind and training their mind to see the truth, really trying to understand what this human life is and what